So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Asphalian's webinar on tips and tricks for IDMP compliant data in your internal database RIM system. Before starting, just a couple of things to take into consideration about the webinar today. It will last approximately 45 to 60 minutes, depending if there are questions or not. In case you have any questions, you can please submit them in the chat because there will be some time devoted to answer them at the end of the webinar. And just to remind you that we will send the presentation per email as well as the link to the recording in the following days. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today from the Data Management Service, Elena Catena, Data Project Manager. Elena has a bachelor's degree in biotechnology and a master's degree in bioinformatics. She has extensive experience in data treatment and analysis and is one of the RIMS and migration experts in the data management team. In today's webinar, she will provide tips and tricks for a smooth data preparation to ensure your data is IDMP compliant. So now Elena will take it from here when you are ready, please.
Perfect. Thank you very, very much, Lydia. Hello, everyone. Many of you already know me from previous webinars, but like always, it is a pleasure for me to be here. So first of all, it would be a pleasure for me to introduce Asphalion. So Asphalion is a leading consultancy and solutions provider of regulatory, scientific, and safety services, that has offices in Barcelona, Madrid, Munich, and London. We have over more than 20 years of experience, and we have over 160 team members. We work with over 1,000 clients, and we have successfully worked with over 5,000 projects. A little bit of what we do. So we are a highly committed, high value partner with global reach, high satisfaction rate from our clients, and we offer tailored made solutions, especially for complex challenges. Our way of working is that we will work as an extension of your team, and with our digital mindset, expertise, and commitment, we will contribute to the success of any project that you give us. I will focus now on the service that I belong to, which is data management. We offer comprehensive support of data compliance for human and veterinary medicines as well of medtech. We offer services for EUDAMED, UPD, as well as services for XVMPD and SPOR. We also give support for ISO IDMP transitions and implementations, as well as RIM systems solutions, and as well project management. We have been working with XVMPD submissions since 2012, and we manage about 3,500 XVMPD requests for over 30 clients per year. We have been successfully completed RIMS and IDMP implementation support projects in over 15 companies, and we have experience of supporting companies with many different ranges of products and portfolios. So now that you know who we are and what we do, let's start with the good stuff of the webinar. What are we going to talk about? So this is the agenda of what the webinar will be about and what I will speak about. So first of all, I will start with the basic. So what is an ISO IDMP compliance system? Why do we need one and why is it beneficial? Next, I will speak about some tips and tricks for this ISO IDMP compliance, followed by tips and tricks for maintaining the system compliance, and finishing by a little take-home message for you. So let's go for it. Let's start with the basics. What is an ISO IDMP compliance system? So exactly, what is an ISO IDMP compliance system? So when we say an ISO IDMP compliance system, what do we mean? We speak about any system that follows the ISO IDMP data model. What does this mean? It means that this system contains the necessary fields from the 6 ISO IDMP categories: medicinal product, marketing authorization information, therapeutic product indication, packaged medicinal product, ingredient, and pharmaceutical product. all these fields have the correct formatting and dependencies, meaning that they all have the correct format and all the dependencies that, depending on the data, they should appear or not. For example, in the case of orphan drugs, if you have orphan drugs, the fields that you will have to be compliant with are not the same as non orphan drugs. Um, in addition, for an ISO, to have a fully ISO IDMP compliant system, it's important that these fields are connected between each other. Since with ISO IDMP, a new data structure is coming. As you can see here in the picture, all of the little fields are connected between each other. This is great because it's not that we have information flying around on the space. No, everything is connected and gives a lot of much more sense to the data. Then, last but not least, an ISO IDMP compliance system should not also store this kind of data, but also you should be able to maintain it. We must think that the data that is stored in ISO IDMP compliance systems will be there for most of the life cycle of the product. So it's quite important that we can maintain it ordered and clean during most of the life cycle. I think that you will agree with me if I say that an ISO IDMP compliance system it's quite complex. It has a lot of fields, a lot of connections, and it's not simple. But let's speak of what is the reality right now. So right now, many systems that are being used are not fully ISO IDMP compliant, which means that they are not really following the ISO IDMP standards. But so far, this has been working great because these non-compliant systems were storing data that had to be reported to the health authorities. For example, XGVMPD. There are many systems that are used right now that only have the necessary data that should be reported to XGVMPD. And so far, this has been great, fantastic. But we have to keep into account that this is dangerous because ISO IDMP is coming, and with ISO IDMP comes more data to be reported, a different data structure, and different data formats. All of this should be supported by the system that you are using. And if we are only working with ISO IDMP data, mm, maybe we have a problem here. Let's look a little bit more deep into it. So these would be all the fields that are involved in XCVMPD. And we can see that there is a little section that do come from XCVMPD. Fantastic. These fields, we can forget about them for now. But there are more than half of the fields that do not come from XCVMPD. This means that the data for these fields has to be retrieved and stored accordingly, and the sources of this data can vary significantly, so it must be taken into account. So, having this said, I think you will agree with me if I say that non-compliant systems have become a little bit too limited for the current necessities of the industry. Why? Because they are no longer supporting the ISO IDMP data model with all the fields, the structure, and the formats and dependencies. So, if by now I haven't really convinced you yet of why being ISO IDMP compliant is beneficial for your company, let me give you some more tips. Why should we become ISO IDMP compliant? Well, because if you become ISO IDMP compliant, you will improve the data quality and structure of your data. Of course, if data is in a structured framework and it's organized, at the end you will be able to work more efficiently with this data. If we work more efficiently with this data, you will be able to provide more accurate information to regulators and other stakeholders. And this may not only apply for the regulatory team, this could also apply for pharmacovigilance, e-submissions, and many other departments from a pharmaceutical company. And last but not least, if we can work more efficiently with our data, this will then transform in an improved patient safety. And at the end, it will facilitate the being regulatory compliant. However, I have to be honest, becoming ISO IDMP compliant, it's not always flowers and sunshine. It comes also with some drawbacks. If you want to become ISO IDMP compliant, you have to be aware that it requires a high amount of resources and it requires collaboration between different stakeholders. As we said before, more than half of the data of of ISO IDMP does not come from XVMPD. So there is a high chance that this data is not really tracked in a system in an ordered way somehow. And it may need collaboration from other departments. So this is always quite complicated. So now that we all understand why ISO IDMP, being ISO IDMP compliant is important and why we should start thinking about becoming ISO IDMP compliant, let's talk about some tips and tricks for ISO IDMP compliance. So, first of all, becoming ISO IDMP compliant, it's quite an abstract concept, but we have gathered a few important questions that you should ask yourself when trying to become ISO IDMP compliant and trying to tackle a project like this. So these are the list of questions, and I will go now one by one and I will explain them with more detail later on. So let's start asking the relevant and important questions. So, first of all, we need to ask ourselves, what options do I have to become ISO IDMP compliant? What will be my data migration strategy? And then what will be my data collection strategy? And finally, how can the missing data be enriched? If we are able to think about and correctly assess all these four questions, we will be able to have a clear strategy for a successful ISO IDMP system implementation, as well as defining the key points for a successful enrichment, which if we know a little bit what we are talking about, we know that ISO IDMP enrichment is always a little bit complicated. We will talk more about that later. And then, if we correctly assess all these questions and we apply all the things that that we will think during all these steps, we will finally end up with a successful ISO IDMP compliance system. So, having this said, let's start with the first question. What options do I have to become ISO IDMP compliant? So there are mainly two options to become ISO IDMP compliant. The first one would be building your own ISO IDMP compliant system. What does this mean? This means that, for example, either from scratch or from an already existing system, you adapt this system or you build this system in order for it to be to contain the same data model as ISO IDMP. You transform into an ISO IDMP compliance system. This is great, especially if you are already working from a starting system that you already like very much. Because at the end, you will end up with a system that you already know, but with some extra features. That's great. And it's perfect because at the end, you will have 100% tailored for you, a solution that is 100% made for you and that it accomplishes all the business needs and matches your way of working. So I like to say that it's a present from you for you. But we have to think of what choosing this option implies. So we need to be aware that building your own ISO IDMP compliance system is very time consuming. You need to be able, like your internal system needs to be able to manage this ISO IDMP compliance system. And I mean in a more technical way. Do you have the space? Do you have the capacity? Do you have, I don't know, the enough servers in the system to manage it, for example? Then there needs to be the resources and the knowledge, the technical resources and the technical knowledge to build this system, as well as the resources of having a deep understanding of the guidelines and the ISO IDMP data model. Otherwise, if you don't have these both resources, building this can be quite challenging. we have to keep into account that this system will have to be manually maintained. For example, if there is any problem or if the EMA makes any update of the guidelines or it makes any change in the data structure and so on, all these changes will have to be assessed manually and internally. Additionally, this ISO IDMP compliance system will have to be manually connected to other platforms that are used that are used in ISO IDMP. For example, export, now XDVMPD/PMS, MEDRA, etc. So, in conclusion, building your own ISO IDMP compliance system is a good option if you want to keep working with what you have, but you need to be prepared and take into account all these other factors which are very limiting in this step. Then, the other option is finding yourself a RIMS solution. So RIMS are regulatory information management systems and are software specialized for storing regulatory data. So, what are the advantages of finding a RIMS solution? Well, you will already have a system that is already ISO IDMP compliant. So, all the things of, oh, I have to think of the data model, how I will do it. No, you have to forget about that. It's already there. Fantastic. No problem. These systems are maintained by an external vendor. So, you will always have the confidence that your system will be compliant with ISO IDMP. Or if there is any change, you are certain that you will have this change applied in X time. Um, and if you need, for example, special ways, or in your team you work in a certain special ways, you need to keep into account that also these types of RIMS solution can be configured in order to be adapted to internal needs and so on. So it's great that they can have additional configuration. And finally, these streams solution are always connected to other platforms, Sport, XDMPD, Medra, which makes the working with this kind of tools quite useful. But as well, the story is never 100% happy. There's always some bad things in the way. So we need to think of the inconveniences that implementing a RIMS solution is not always the most simple process. You need to have the resources and the time for this implementation, as well as you need to keep into account there will need to be an adjustment of your internal processes to this system, because at the end you will have to adapt to this new system, to this new way of working. So let's keep that into account. Then at the end, knowing that there are these two options, how can I choose an option? Well, this will depend a lot on your way of working, on how are you comfortable of doing things, and what do you want. But the main factors mm, that are important when making this decision is the size of the portfolio, the variety of the portfolio, because we know that if we have different types of medicinal products, they can be subject to different types of regulations. So we need to take into account that the our system has to be mindful of that. And then how many resources can be invested for this type of project. In order to give you a little bit more light on how can you make this decision, I will show you what other clients that we have are doing, depending on their size. So for example, early stage and small clients, they usually don't really have an ISO IDMP compliance system. Why? Because they usually have a low amount of data and it's quite simple and easy to maintain. But for this type of clients, I always like to say the same thing. It's like a snowball. It starts very small. We don't have that much data. It's fine. But at the end, you start gathering more and more and more, and you end up with a big ton of data in an unstructured, unorganized way, and you at the end need an ISO IDMP compliance system. So at the end, it's quite good to have one, even though we don't have that much data. This is our recommendation. For medium-sized companies, we have seen that some have or some are implementing an ISO IDMP compliance system. Why? Because somehow they start having more complex data. Obviously, it depends on the portfolio and their internal processes, but at the end, they do have the need of having their data in a structured way and in an ISO IDMP compliance system. Finally, large companies, they usually either have one or they are already implementing one or they will implement one. Why? Because they have very complex data that also involve many internal stakeholders. And managing this without a structured system, it can be impossible. You may have noticed as well that data enrichment happens even though like it doesn't matter your size, it always happens. Yes, this is true. Data enrichment has to be done even though you have low data, medium sized data, or a lot of data. It doesn't matter. Why? Because the data that is tracked in ISO IDMP usually is not tracked in any other database or anything. So there must be a data collection phase. So it must always be done. The only thing that the only difference that we will have is depending on the size of the portfolio. A bigger portfolio will require a bigger effort. So I hope that knowing all of this will help you and know how you will become ISO IDMP compliant and what option you will choose. Then, once we know what ISO IDMP compliance system we will have, how are we going to import the data into our system? Because usually we will start with an empty system. If you tell me, oh, Elena, but this is not my case because I will build my own ISO IDMP system from the one that I already have, and I will have the data there. The data will not change. Perfect. Then you can just go to the next question. Fantastic. This is not for you then. But if you are starting from an empty system, you need to think how the data can be fed into this system. The way that the data can be fed into the system is 100% dependent on the system. I cannot tell you right now how it can be because it's 100% dependent on how the system works. But we can ask questions in order to understand how it can be done and how can we overcome it. So, first of all, first question, does the system have a tool to import the information? Is there any kind of loader, importer? Do we have that? Or does the system require scripting or coding in order to import the data? Do we need SQL scripting or do we need something else? How can we do it? Or does the system only accept data that is introduced manually? If so, how easy it is to introduce this data? Those are questions that are important to ask yourself when you are planning a data import strategy because it will affect a lot on the timings and the way of working because it is not the same if I have to put data into my system that I do it field per field, product by product, or if I can do it just by one click automatically. Pew, that's all. So, being able to answer all these questions will give you a lot of information of how the data import strategy will be. Now, now that we know how we will move our data, let's start of how we will organize our data, how we will collect it, how we will put it into our system. So, first of all, let me tell you that this process will depend on the amount of data, the quality of data. So here for the quality of data, it's important that each company internally does this exercise of evaluating if their data is trustworthy and has enough quality. For example, would you trust an Excel file that, yes, it contains information, but it's an Excel file that has passed many team members. It's old. Everyone has been working on it by their own. Mm, it's problematic, right? So it's important to understand if your data has enough quality in order to be ISO IDMP compliant. And then again, it will also depend on the variation of the data. If I have many types of products and so on that are subject of different types of regulation, I need to know that in order to plan it accordingly. So, having this in mind, let me show you a few strategies of data collections that could be useful for you. So, where do I get the data from the where do I get the data that I will feed into my ISO IDMP compliance system? So, first of all, I will start by this one. What if I get the data only from XCVMPD? That's great because data that you will import from XCVMPD is already validated by the EMA. So you will make sure that your data is correct and valid by the health authority. And this is a perfect option if the client does not have any internal database because you will be in a very good start. However, if you do have an internal database, this option may not be the best for you because you need to keep into account that if there is any extra information that is not in XCVMPD in that internal database, it will not be imported. So this has to be taken into account. Then there is the other way, the other option, which is importing data only from your current data system. Ah, this is a great solution because you will make sure that all the data that you have been gathering in your system will be imported in the new ISO IDMP compliance system. Great. But now we come up with another problem. This data will not be validated by the EMA like it is for the XCVMPD data. And also, there is the problem of the data quality. Can we trust the data that we have in our internal system? We need to really evaluate this. And then there is the third option, that the option that I like to call the best of both worlds, when we use data from XCVMPD and from our current system. So, what are the advantages of going of using this strategy? So, first of all, the data that will be in our system will be validated by the EMA, and we will not have the problem that that data from our current system will be missing since we will have all the data in one place. However, we must keep into mind that there needs to be an exercise done of connecting these two data sources. Why? Because at the end, these two data sources will share many information, and well, we need to do this exercise before doing this strategy. I have to say that there is also one drawback from all of the three strategies, and it's that it doesn't matter which strategy you do, you will have ISO IDMP data missing. Mm, of course, because if the data is not in XVMPD and it's not in my current system, we need to find it somewhere else, so it will be missing. Before moving forward, I would like to make a parenthesis and make a warning message. If you are thinking of working with XVMPD, um, there must be a check of the data correctness. Why? Because the EMA sometimes can update the data from XCVMPD. Sometimes there is a mistake when introducing the data or something is not correct. And these changes are, are notified through the third acknowledgements. In Asphalion, we recommend reviewing and analyzing these third acknowledgements. Why? Because then we can avoid any possible mistakes and confusion when working with data from these two data sources. What I mean, if the data from XCVMPD comes from our internal system and then we have the data from XCVMPD corrected, there will be a discrepancy between these two systems. And this, of course, can cause confusion and can cause many problems. So it's good to review it in order to have these two systems aligned. And as well to make sure that the changes made from the EMA are correct, because at the end, people from the EMA are human and they can also make mistakes. So it's important to make sure that the changes from our products are correct and are aligned with our internal databases. So now that we know what we're going to do with the data that we do have, let's focus on the data that we do not have. The data from that comes from the ISO IDMP fields that are not covered by XCVMPD. So for these um, fields, there needs to be done data enrichment, but that in context data enrichment consists in the process of completing the missing gaps between the data from your system and the ISO IDMP standards. At the end, when we collect all this data, we will be able to have a system that is fully ISO IDMP compliant. So we will have all the cheese here. So it's fantastic. So let's see how can we enrich the data, and I will give you here some tips, tricks, and watchouts when planning for a project like this. So first of all, what are the data enrichment watchouts? Again, let me go back to our second point very, very quickly, and is that we need to understand how the data can be fed into the system. It's very important, again, to understand what. I am sorry that I am going back for this, but it's very, very important, because now we are not working with data that is already in a system or that we know where it is. We are working with data that comes from new sources that we don't know where it is, and we need to know exactly how to do it and how to put it in the system. So that's why it's super important to know how we are going to import it. Next, we need to be mindful of the dimensions of the project. This project tends to be quite complex and big, so we should not underestimate it and we should plan ahead accordingly. Next, we need to understand the internal processes. The regulatory team is not the only one responsible for ISO IDMP compliance. We will need collaboration from pharmacovigilance, even marketing, even quality. Mm, There needs to be a full understanding of who has what in the company, which brings me to the next point. We need to understand the current data governance policies of the company. Let me stop here, because data governance is a word, a fancy word that it's usually used, but mm, usually it's not really understood. It's quite abstract. So let's stop here and let's talk a little bit about data governance. So, what is data governance? So, data governance is the process of managing the availability, usability, integrity, and security of data in a system. So, in other words, it's what manages where it is the data, who has this data, how is this data used, and how is this data kept safe in a system. Having effective data governance allows you uh, to have quality and trustworthy data. Of course, if you have a control, who has it, where it is, how is it safe, and so on, you will have everything under control and everything great. However, if these data governance policies are not very effective, it can cause inconsistencies in the data and data integrity problems, which at the end can cause major issues in a company. And this does not only apply for pharmaceutical companies. Data governance applies for any kind of companies. It's very, very important because, of course, when data is the most important asset that a company has, so it has to be kept accordingly. So now that we understand what data governing and data governance is, who has the data, how is it kept, how is it used, and how is it saved, let me go back to the enrichment. So when working with enrichment, of course, we have to understand the current data governance. We need to know who has the data, where is it safe, how has it has it been used, and so on, because we will need it for our enrichment project. Next, we have to keep in mind to use the tools that we already have. We need to work smart but not hard. We don't have to invent the wheel. We have to think that we already have the ISO IDMP guidelines. We have chapter 2 that is super useful. It has all the information on the fields, the format, if it's mandatory, if it's not, if it's conditional, if it's not. It's fantastic. You have all the information, which it's great for for ISO IDMP enrichments. And then we also have chapter 8, for example, that has the examples for all these data fields that at least gives you a hint of how will the data look in real life. And as well, we do not have to forget about SPOR. SPOR contains like the R of SPOR and the O, all the controlled vocabularies and organizations that will be used for ISO IDMP. So using this in your favor would be great and will help you a lot for any ISO IDMP enrichment project. Then, by assessing all these watchouts, we will then have have a clarity, and then we will be able to have a successful enrichment strategy, and at the end, a successful project. At the end, there is no golden rule in ISO IDMP enrichment, so at the end, the best that I can tell you is that you should work in a way that it's comfortable for you, that makes sense in your business logic, and that makes sense internally. Here in Asphalion, we are used to seeing many things that different clients are comfortable doing. For example, some prefer and enriching Excels, like so, a blank Excel, and they fill the information. Others prefer Excels that have some kind of code behind it that will check the information and will check the data correctness. And others simply prefer assistance when filling the data of ISO IDMP manually into the system. It doesn't matter at the end because all of the ways will lead to the same endpoint, to the same destination, which is being fully ISO IDMP compliant. Here in Asphalion, we will be super happy to help you if you have any questions or you need help with planning your strategy and so on. And we please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Now, having all of this said, uh, let's talk about maintaining the system compliance because yes, we have been talking of in which system are we going to be compliant? How are we going to import all the data? What data and the enrichment? Oh, and all of this. Yes, doing all of this can take months. It's a very difficult process, but we need to think about what are we gonna do to maintain it because it's a process that takes so much time and resources that we must keep going. Data has to be kept organized and clean. We cannot let it all go wild again and crazy. No. So, data maintenance can be achieved by, for example, the following tips. Developing work instructions or standard operating procedures. Uh, this has proven to be very helpful because at the end you must define your way of working in that new system. And for example, how is new data introduced in the system? This is very important. And as well, again, review the current data governance policies. Here again, a little tip on what data governance is. Why is it important to review the current data governance policies? First, because you are working with a new system that has much more data, and this data comes from other sources that were not accounted with on the first place. So, knowing all of this, it's important to update it and to review if it matches what we said. Um, so, After all these 40 minutes, I hope that everything is clear. We know what we should do in order to plan a successful ISO IDMP implementations and all the steps. So here is my little take home message from me to you people. So, first of all, um, we know what ISO IDMP compliance systems are, and we know that they have become a must in the pharmaceutical industry. We understand that non-compliant systems have become too limited for the ISO IDMP data model, and that at the end it will be important. Um, then, for the tips and tricks section, my take home message will be to please keep in mind the questions that we have made at the beginning of this section. So, how will I become ISO IDMP compliant? Will I build it myself or will I get a RIMS solution? What will be my data import strategy? What will be my data collection strategy? Will it be from XVMPD, my internal database? Will I do a mix and get the best of both worlds? What are we going to do? And at the end, understand that ISO IDMP ISO IDMP, excuse me, data enrichment is very important at the end to be fully ISO IDMP compliant because you will need to fill the gaps of information from your internal system or XVMPD with ISO IDMP, and it will require effort from different departments. And last but not least, we need to maintain the system compliance. We cannot let all the process here that we have spent weeks, months working so hard, let it go to waste. No, no, no. It's very important to have a plan and how will the data integrity and quality and structure be maintained because no, we cannot let it go to waste. No. And of course, again, we must review the current data governance policies. Here in Asphalion, we have experience in all of these three aspects. So, yeah, again, if there are any questions, if there are any doubts, or if you need assistance to plan a project like this for your company, do not hesitate to reach out to us because we will be super happy to help you and assist you in anything that we can. Now, saying this, I would like to say thank you. We have come to the end of this webinar. Thank you very much for being here. And I will be answering any questions that are in the chat or anything that comes up. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena, for this fantastic presentation. So let's see if someone wants to ask something. Please submit your questions in the chat so that we can read them aloud. There was someone. Exactly. Which system do you think is best IDMP compliant currently on the market?
Oh, okay. We start with a tricky question. Okay. Well, I have to say that most of the systems that are currently in the market are fully ISO IDMP compliant, and this is not something that you should, of course, it's something that you should take into account when trying to choose a RIM system. But at the end, you should focus not only on if it is ISO IDMP compliant, but if it matches your business logic and your way of working. Um, Although this is also a quite complex question, so I will answer further to this question by email, if it's okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Elena. Let's see if there's any more question. Thank you, Elisabetta. So it seems there are no more questions, but
Okay.
remember that if someone has further questions, you can send them to info@asphalion.com. I just wrote it in the chat as well. So that's a wrap. Thank you, Lena, again for this great presentation. Thank you to the attendees, and we hope you enjoyed the webinar, and we will send you the presentation shortly. Have a nice afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.